So without question, the Adidas AE1 was probably the most anticipated shoe of the year, maybe the Nike Book one as well. But then after they came out, I think these were definitely some of the most hyped shoes too that came out. Got a lot of really rave reviews from a lot of really good sneaker reviewers. I did find a lot of things in them though that I did not like, and a lot of things that I thought opted a lot of people out of them. So in this video, I want to show you how I would fix all the things I didn't like about the AE1 and the specific fixes that I would implement into the AE1 to bring it up to the level that I think the shoe has kind of been hyped to be. Let's get into it. Now the first thing that really bothers me about the AE1 is its weight. These things come in at 19.54 ounces or 554 grams for a men's size 11. That is a hefty shoe. Now there are a lot of different places you can take the weight out, while also I really feel like improving the performance of the shoe. Now I think the easiest place to drop weight from the shoe while also actually improving its performance would be just in the Jet Boost itself. Now this is a 2.9 centimeter heel height and a 1.3 centimeter heel to ball drop on my pair. You could take this down to 2.5 centimeters in the heel. Honestly, Jet Boost is super durable. It's super resilient, even to a very heavy foot coming down. Just Original Boost is one of the most sturdy foams out there, also one of the most comfortable out there. So to me, you don't need a huge stack of it to, retain its best quality. Plus, take that from 2.5 centimeters. I mean, you can even like lower the drop, maybe like 1.2, right, 1.1 centimeters. You still decrease the volume, of the Jet Boost. You're gonna get a little bit more of a flexible shoe. You're gonna get a little more of a buttery feel, a little bit more ground contact. Now that brings me to the next thing, which would be the shank of these things. Now, I like the shank because it actually is full length. It gets thin, and it gets pretty thick here, and it's molded, and then it thins out again into the forefoot. Honestly though, if you look at this shank in the middle, it's bottom loaded, right? So the molding of it isn't as important to me. I love the undulations, the shape of this midsole and outsole, right? It kind of creates this micro and macro traction, which I think is fantastic. You're getting two different traction profiles with the same shoe. I think that's one of the best parts of the AE1. But honestly, if you thinned out the arch, right, maybe kept it a little bit more thin and made it longer, right? Not necessarily higher, what this is showing, but just longer, right? You might be able to, like I said, take down the amount of Jet Boost in there while still keeping the shoe really flexible, but also very sturdy, because that shank is now relying on its length, not necessarily its girth right here, or its width, or its chunkiness in the middle of the shoe. All things to kind of take the weight down a little bit, but also keep the shoe sturdy, but a little bit more flexible, a little bit more buttery, because that's the other thing I really thought about these, is that yes, they're heavy, and there are a lot of heavy shoes out there that don't feel bottom heavy. These ones to me felt like they were very, very, very bottom heavy shoes. So I think just that in the bottom of it would really kind of make the shoe actually a little more lively maybe, and actually allow people to experience more of the benefits of Jet Boost, right? Jet Boost to me is almost like some of the PEBA-based foams, right? Or some of the thermoplastics you see in Anta or in Li-Ning shoes, whereas sometimes they're taking the stack of those down a little bit more because you don't need as much of it. It's more insulating into the foot, right? So like the Kai 1, there's a low stack of that stuff, but you still feel it underfoot. You're actually able to extract all the performance out of that super elite foam, which Jet Boost definitely is. Now the next thing might be a little bit nitpicking, but the heel counter of this shoe, that's not carbon fiber. I know it looks like carbon fiber, right? And it's made to look like it, but it is just plastic. So I feel like if you change that to actual carbon fiber, also you get a little bit of a weight reduction, that just the profile of it is gonna be a little bit less. There's so much padding around the heel. If you look here, there is an internal heel counter padding and then that external heel counter. And that external heel counter, if you look at this from the profile view, right, the cut in half view, that is a thick, thick external heel counter. When you already have one on the inside, even just a very thin, more flexible carbon fiber out, because remember, you take the carbon fiber, make it a little bit more thin, then that's how you can mold a little bit better. You could have, number one, taken the weight down off of this, but also, two, I think, made a little bit more of a cool design choice with that. All right, but moving up from the bottom of the shoe, I think the next thing that I wasn't super, thrilled about was the lateral flange on these things. So yeah, there is a lateral flange. I mean, I just kind of followed the contour. As you can see, it's right there, but to me, these shoes still taper pretty hard into the forefoot, and that flange to me just isn't enough, honestly, to keep the shoe super stable. To me, these felt a little bit laterally unstable at times. And for someone like Anthony Edwards, who has elite level footwork, okay, yeah, he can get away with it. But I've also seen him sprain his ankle on the court with nobody around him. And so, not saying that's the shoe's fault, but I'm just saying I think you can make the shoe a little bit more protective against things like that. If you're gonna have a shoe be over 19 ounces for a men's size 11, it should at least have a very substantial flange. So I think instead of it being, actually I will draw this again here. So instead of it being like this shape, right? Let's maybe do this in purple. Maybe come down here and then maybe do like Babolat in the tennis space does, maybe have like a little bit of a sharper flange out there. Just, you know, you can kind of keep similar shape to it, but at least jut out a little bit more. Or as you can see here, this is a little bit more of an outsole base flange. Maybe just have that outsole base flange just poke out a little bit more, right? Just to give a little bit more stability there. You can still have the shoe taper if you want, right? You can still make it a little bit more streamlined, but maybe just give a little bit to that lateral side, maybe even just to shut people like me up. Now the uppers, the AE1, I do like to a certain extent. This honeycombing, yeah, it looks very interesting, and I do like the design of it. I think it looks so cool, and it does provide, you know, pretty nice stabilizing elements to it, right? It creates all the foxing of the shoe or stabilizing elements of the shoe. However, it's so thick, and there's no breathing through it, right? Like if you look at the teardown portion of the shoe, there's no breathing channels through all this honeycombing. Why make it like this when it can't breathe? There's like a couple holes in here where it can kind of get through. And even there, I know when I did my fog test on this, there wasn't much air going through there at all. So honestly, you could make the honeycombing, like you could take this down almost by half at certain points, right? So make it less honeycombing, that would take the weight down of the shoe. But also, if you're gonna make all these perforations, why not make more of them go all the way through the shoe? At least give the shoe a little more breathability. Because if you look at these uppers here, I mean, look on the inside, this is some thick material here, especially, you know, around the ankle collar here. This is pretty thick old school jersey material, which I think is great. That is really, really cool. And I think it's nice and substantial, right? The eyelets have this backing through them, right? They're metal on the inside. I think that's awesome. That is good build quality. But I think there needs to be something in there if you're gonna have all this molding and no breathing channels, just something to allow a little bit more breathing through the shoe. So to me, yes, the design is good, the function may not be as great. And remember, I think people think that this is gonna have so much stability because of the honeycombing and how substantial the molding is on the shoe. But then the flange on it just isn't super wide. It's just not a super laterally stable shoe. So the shoe is almost occupying two different categories at one time, but not doing either of them to its fullest potential. All right, but turning the shoe over after I poked all these holes in it, honestly, the last big thing about the AE1 that really bothered me was the tongue. Now, it's not bad per se, but the shoe is so substantial. So yeah, there's two levels of padding there, but that padding isn't very substantial. Also, there's no breathing channels through it, right? So you could make the tongue a little bit bulkier, right, a little more substantial, and just throw some breathing channels through there and you'd solve a couple problems, right? Breathability as well as a little bit more substance. Now, the thing I think is crazy about this is the gusset on this is which connects the tongue into the strobel. So this is the most substantial piece of elastic I think I've ever seen. It is super heavy duty, whereas on most gusseted tongues like this, where it's just one little strap attaching the tongue down, it's a really thin piece of elastic, whereas in these ones, I'm guessing because the shoe is so heavy, right, so bottom heavy, that little piece of elastic probably just wasn't enough to hold the tongue into place. Now, some shoes don't have gussets at all. It's just attached right here, right at the vamp of the shoe, which those, you know, you're always having problems with. So, I mean, at least it is gusseted. But I think for a shoe of this substance, maybe don't try this type of gusset on the shoe. Do the actual gusset where it comes and, you know, fans out into the strobel board, right? Which is normally what you see with shoes that have gussets that are really wide. That also just gives a little bit more lockdown into the shoe, and with a shoe this heavy, you could have made a netted gusset down there that number one would breathe, but number two would actually make your foot feel like it's lifting up more of the shoe, right? A little more load share, so the shoe wouldn't feel as heavy. So you're not feeling like you're trying to lift, like I said, an anvil with a rubber band in a lot of my videos. I think this is a pretty funny solution, making this elastic so tough, but I think ultimately it would have been better if you'd have just maybe bulked the tongue up a little bit more, made it match the rest of the shoe, given it some breathing channels, and made it a little bit more of an aggressive gusset that way. Like I said, if you were gonna keep the bulk of the shoe, the uppers kind of would match the level of the mid and outsole. So like I've said previously, the AE1's still a fantastic shoe. It's just there are some things in them that definitely, at least in my opinion, need addressed, and hopefully maybe they get addressed in the AE2. But if you do want to see the deep dive and teardown of the AE1 to kind of see all the tests I do on this shoe and kind of see where I came to all these conclusions from, I will leave that video linked up above. Make sure you subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.